Well, hello and welcome back to Calais. It's day 9 of COP16. What the hell is COP16? For those that haven't been following, it's the Convention of Biological Diversity, this incredibly important convention where all the countries of the world, and there's 192 countries here represented here in Calais, coming together to look at how we can reverse the decline of our wildlife across the world, and indeed work towards a nature positive future where actually our wildlife populations start to increase. And at the last COP, they brought in the global biodiversity framework, the Paris Agreement, the equivalent of the Paris Agreement for climate, really important. And this is the COP, this is the meeting of the contracting parties, the COP, 16th meeting of the CBD, getting together to look at how each different country can make that global biodiversity framework work. What we're doing in these broadcasts is looking at how we can turn international convention to action on the ground. What does all of this mean? There's a massive jamboree that's happening here in Calais, 10,000 people. What does it all mean for the UK? We've just been through the weekend. That was quite important for the negotiators because they finally got some time off. So as I said previously, the COP's in kind of 3 parts. So you've got the negotiating part, which is the countries. You've got the blue zone, which is all the side events and so on, and the green zone, which is the public part of it. So we actually took a bit of time off as well. We've got a few pictures of some amazing birds that we saw up in the cloud forests above Calais. Absolutely gorgeous. So that was a lovely morning off, but we were back in the blue zone, of course, in the afternoon, on Sunday afternoon and all day yesterday. One of the things that we went to yesterday was 60 years celebration of 60 years of the Red List. It's a really important process that the International Union for Nature Conservation runs, which is about identifying those species most at risk of extinction. So everything from not threatened at all the way through to actually, unfortunately, extinct. We're broadcasting here live from Central Calais. We're in the Airbnb that we're staying in. I can hear yellow-headed caracas screeching outside. That's a type of eagle, which is fantastic. It's not all that smooth. There's a lot of security in Calais. Colombia's not the safest country in the world. So we've got a lot of police, a lot of army out in the thing. We get police escorts, would you believe, on the buses to the conference centre. Occasionally the water goes off. And yesterday, right in the middle of the broadcast, so irritating, the broadband went off. So apologies to you all who were listening yesterday. And it suddenly got cut short in the middle there. So what we're going to do today is we're going to carry on some of the stuff that we did yesterday. And then I'm delighted that Kathryn Brown has come back from Moving House and she can update us on the negotiations. She's a veteran at this thing, at this sort of stuff. So yesterday we were talking about green finance, particularly the role of private finance, the corporate world in financing nature's recovery. We had Jenny Davis-Bouquet from Bain & Co. She set the scene, really thinking about the corporate world's impact on nature. Very complex. Only 5% of companies have assessed their impacts. Only 1% have assessed their dependencies. So there's really a long way to go for the corporate sector. But fundamentally, they need to avoid damage to nature, reduce the damage where possible, and then move towards actions that builds that nature positive future. And I have to say, I think they're pretty long way from that. So there's quite a lot of work to be done there. One of the leading companies in this space is Claudine Blaney from Aviva Insurance, a UK-based company. And we spoke to her about what does this matter for Aviva? And they talked about their supply chain and particularly talked about the companies that they invest in and how that they can work out their impact. And they're developing models, sector pathways are called, but essentially models that help different parts of the economy, things like concrete or aviation or agriculture, to assess their impacts on nature and therefore do something about it. And then we spoke to Nina Seeger, and apologies to Nina for the break in her broadcast, but we did get the whole one in the end. And she talked about this funding gap, really, that currently, unbelievably, there's $35 billion worth of investment into nature across the world, but we need to increase that to roughly 700 billion. So we're a very, very long way off from that. And she talked about the ways that we might do that. And in particular, this move from subsidies and business activities that damage nature to subsidies and business activities that improve nature. And actually, there's more than enough money to do that. We just need to work out the mechanisms. So it was a really interesting session. What we didn't get onto and wanted to get onto was really how does some of that relate to the UK? And we have a number of ways that we, the Wildlife Trust, are working with corporate companies to bring corporate financing into nature's recovery. And we often use different types of credit mechanisms. So the first is the Peatland Code, and we actually run the Peatland Code in the Wildlife Trust. So we host the IUCN, International Union for Nature Conservation's peatland programme, and that runs the Peatland Code. And the Peatland Code is a method to provide surety to companies that if we re-wet peatlands, that we can use proxy measures such as the condition of peatlands and water level and things like that to show how many tonnes of carbon are being reduced as a result of that re-wetting of peatland. And that's working really well. We've got over 200 projects now under the Peatland Code, and many, many millions of tonnes of carbon dioxide will now not go into the atmosphere, those reduced emissions. Our second area that we've been working on is the Woodland Carbon Code, and that's very similar to the Peatland Code, but this time it's about the carbon that is sequestered out the atmosphere, and by measuring the number of trees, their thickness, the type of trees, the conditions they're growing in, we can assess how much this carbon is being pulled out of the atmosphere. And we're using that in the Aviva Rainforest project that we showed you a little video of on Saturday. Another code that we developed, and actually developed by the Wildlife Trust and then taken on by government, is nutrient neutrality, which is a hell of a mouthful. But essentially, there was a test case in the Netherlands. So where special areas of conservation and special protection areas are grossly polluted, what the Friends of the Earth in the Netherlands and WWF in the Netherlands showed and went through to the European Court and got approved was that actually any development that happens that adds nutrient pollution into that system really needs to be neutral. So they have to work out of neutral. That's not that straightforward. And what Hampshire came up with was this system where they buy a farm, they take it out of arable production. So all of that excess nutrient that comes out of that system is removed. That creates a nutrient credit, and that can be used to fund nature conservation. And we're just going to play a video of one example of that, which is for Dorset Wildlife Trust, Wild Woodbury, fantastic site, and entirely paid for through the nutrient neutrality scheme through Dorset Council in that particular case, but coming from private finance.
Bob Farrington, I work for Dorset Wildlife Trust as the head of Wilder Landscapes. 3 years ago in 2021, Dorset Wildlife Trust purchased 170 hectares of land in between Wareham Forest and the village of Beer Regis. And our aims were simple, really, to make more space for nature and more space for people, and to learn about new ways of managing land and share that learning with as many different people as possible. Wild Woodbury is all about using natural processes to manage the land, and that's about allowing natural succession of plant life, re-wetting the land by undoing previous drainage, and using extensive, very low numbers of mixed grazing, such as these Exmoor ponies behind me, to battle with that succession, to create a mosaic of habitats, of ever-changing habitats. We restored the headwaters of the River Sherford on site, meaning when water is plentiful, the land acts as a sponge, creating fantastic wildlife habitat. And when we move to times of drought, the land still is releasing water downstream. Species are returning to the site, and interestingly, many of those species are species that you wouldn't expect to be turning up in this kind of place. And we're already learning so much about species that we assumed needed certain things, but on the basis of what we're seeing here, maybe we were mistaken. And just as importantly as new species turning up, we're seeing the mass increase of the abundance of the species that were already clinging on the edges of this site, and they are spreading across the old fields from the hedges and massively increasing in number. Wild Woodbury is such an exciting project to be a part of, because it's all about trying new things and learning from those and sharing that learning with others. It's been amazing to see the changes over the last 3 years, and we can't wait to see what happens next.
What a fabulous example. Thank you, Rob. And I've had the pleasure of going around Wild Woodbury, and it really is just fantastic. Just 3 years ago, that was an arable field, very, very little wildlife in there. And look at look at the changes that are happening. Now, that's a result of corporate money coming out of the private sector. This is one of these green finance mechanisms, including neutrality in that particular case. Just want to say hello we've got people joining in from us from around the world, actually, which is fantastic. We've got people from Morocco, from Vienna, from Spain, even got people from Colombia, hooray, which is great to see here in Colombia. Can I say hello to, let's just have a look, Carmen from London, Brian from East Devon, JW, we've got Angie from Wiltshire, from and Suzanne. And actually, I'll turn to Matlock to introduce the next part of these green finance mechanisms, which is biodiversity net gain. That's a new system that was mandated in the Environment Act. It only came in February last year. It's a compliance market, so it's a statutory market. Basically says that if you build a development and you have an impact on nature, you not only have to avoid impacts on nature, just go through the mitigation hierarchy, as they say, so avoid impacts, reduce impacts, mitigate impacts, but on top of that, you have to then add another 10% of biodiversity. We use a metric called the biodiversity net gain metric that Natural England devised, and that's creating a whole new market. And again, the Wildlife Trust are heavily involved in that. We've got some pictures now, but one of those sites is Common Farm, pretty close to Matlock, Suzanne, just outside Belper, actually. Absolutely gorgeous site. And that currently is sheep grazed pasture, but that's rapidly turning into a beautiful wildlife-rich habitat as a result of those biodiversity net gain credits. How does all of this relate to the Global Biodiversity Framework? Well, there's actually 5 targets in there. So target 1, spatial planning. So biodiversity net gain being a very good example of that. Target 2, restoration of degraded areas, the so-called 30 by 30 target. So we want to restore 30% of our degraded lands. That, unfortunately, is pretty much everywhere in the UK by 2030. Target 12, which is improving urban blue and green spaces, and let's bring biodiversity net gain into the cities. That's where the people live, so it's really important. Target 14, integrate nature into policy, regulations, planning and development. None of these credit systems work without some form of regulation, so it's really important that government does that. And target 19, increase that level of financial resource to $700 billion a year across the globe, and quite a lot in the UK, of course. Big ask for government from this. It's budget day tomorrow. We would like to see the budget include some reference to nature, but the sorts of asks that we're asking for is that nature-based solutions, these sorts of solutions that we're talking about, are built into climate mitigation and adaptation, bring the nature and climate crisis together and deal with it together. They're inextricably linked. Mandate this thing called Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosure. This is where companies have to report their impacts on nature. And that's really important because no company really wants to say they're trashing nature, and that will stop them doing that. And then making sure that these credit-based systems that we've just been talking about are operating at very high quality levels, and they're not just corporate greenwashing, which they have, in the carbon world, there's potential to go towards sort of the greenwashing. So regulate to ensure high integrity for green finance. So government, I hope you're listening. These are things that we need you to do. Okay, look, that finishes the broadcast from yesterday. To complete today's broadcast, I'm just going to bring in Kathryn Brown, our Director of Climate and Evidence. Welcome back, Kathryn. You've been moving house, I believe.
I have, thank you, Rob. And yeah, I've managed to at least spend a bit of time today looking at what's been happening in the negotiations. And coming into week 2, we now have ministers arriving. So we've got over 100 ministers now in the conference. And today kicks off what's called the high-level segment. And that's when ministers show up and do a lot of procedural work and kind of gatherings and meetings. But some of them at least will also be entering into the negotiating groups, what's called these contact groups and working groups, to try and move things along a little bit. And what's notable, I think, going into week 2, the CBD Secretariat, so who are overseeing the agenda and the process, they've described it as discussions are going well, but it's a heavy agenda. And what that effectively means is nothing has actually been agreed yet. So at the end of week 1, not unusual for a COP to not have got any decision text yet that's been signed off. It's not that unusual. But I think for this COP, everyone was hoping they would have at least some of what you would call the easier items. I mean, none of them are easy when you're trying to get 190 odd countries to agree every line of text in a document. You can imagine how difficult that is. But even some of the more straightforward, really, bits of text, we're still waiting to see. And that's things like, it's quite a lot of discussion on marine, actually, discussions on invasive species. And then the more difficult agenda items, so digital sequencing information, that's still, it's going. The reports are that, there's quite a nice feeling in that group, but actually they're still nowhere closer to getting a consensus even on the definition of digital sequencing information. So what's being talked about here.
Sorry, Kathryn, just to
Yeah, go
clarify
ahead.
that, that's the digital sequence information is the stuff around effectively gene edited organisms, isn't it? So it's
It's genetic information from wildlife and how we think about that, how we think about how we use it, and who benefits from that as well. So that's always been a really difficult one, and still seems to be getting a little bit stuck. And the other is finance, obviously. So you were just talking, Rob, about some of the financial mechanisms we have within the UK to look at how we place a value on biodiversity and how we bring about nature's recovery through better financial systems. But we also have this this discussion about a global instrument for biodiversity finance, which is about finance flows between countries. And I think, again, there's still 4 options on the table for what that might look like and how that might work. And I think everybody's feeling at the end of week 1 they would have liked to have seen a bit less of that, and maybe fewer options. And I think, although there's been a little bit of time off over the weekend, I think generally negotiators are starting to be working through the night as well as during the day to try and move these things on a little bit.
Well, look, thank you very much, Kathryn. And it does feel like the negotiations got a bit stuck. We had high hopes for the health and nature, not so-called non-paper. I mean, the terminology of these negotiations is utterly confusing. So there's non-papers and command groups and all sorts of things going on. But some of those crucial papers are getting a bit stuck, and we really want to keep them in there. Look, I just want to say another hello. We've got somebody from Spain here, so Patricia Carmona Pilares, fantastic. It's great to see an international audience here as well as a British audience. You're very, very welcome in here. This is about international negotiations after all. I think that's enough for today. So look, we're heading into the really crucial days of the negotiations now. We're getting into the really crunchy stuff. As Kathryn says, I think those negotiators are going to be working pretty hard in the next few days. Let's hope we get an agreement by the close of play on Friday. I wonder if it will go into Saturday. Let's see. Tune in tomorrow. Please tune in tomorrow, and we will keep you updated for all that's happening here at COP16 and talk about how it relates back to our own British islands. If you want to find out more, click on the QR code. But for now, goodbye from Calais, goodbye from Kathryn in Berkshire, and we'll see you tomorrow.